don't think, my mic's working, because we need to start with Ronald Azuma, who is really, he basically is from the beginning, the roots of augmented reality. His name is mentioned. He's credited with actually defining the original term augmented reality. He built the first working AR system, and now he's at Intel Labs creating new experiences, which I hope we'll hear something about. I'm not going to waste any more time. Thank you, Ronald.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you. I want to talk about AR storytelling, and specifically I want to cover two things. The first is Leviathan, which is a series of AR demonstrations that Intel showed at CES earlier this year to inspire people about one particular approach toward AR storytelling. And the other is I want to talk about three other approaches by which AR storytelling might be compelling. So the first thing, Leviathan. Leviathan is a novel. It's written by Scott Westerfield. It's an imaginative steampunk fantasy alternate Earth set in around World War I, in which humanity discovered genetic engineering technology very early. And therefore, in some countries, a biological revolution supplanted the Industrial Revolution. So in some places, instead of building things like dirigibles, they fabricated new types of living creatures. So the Leviathan itself is an airship, but it looks like a humongous giant flying whale. And at Intel, we were inspired by this, and we showed a couple of AR demonstrations based upon this, one of which occurred at the CEO keynote, which I'll show you a snippet right here. If we can turn the sound up.
An amazing form. No longer limited to a flat book, a flat screen. With the right technology that we can enable, we can be immersed in this story. Some of you may know Scott Westerfield's book, Leviathan. Leviathan is the story of a whale airship. Up until now, you've been, at best, engaged in that story. So that's great. But what if we could do more? What if we could bring the digital world into our world? Imagine Leviathan could be here in this room with us tonight, flying just above your heads. Wouldn't you want to reach out and touch it, wave to it, see it from every angle? Remember, I told you this was an immersive event tonight. Tonight, I don't want you to merely imagine a flying whale. I want you to experience it. Sight, sound, all of it.
Okay, so in the keynote, there was only one person that had a tablet, that had a personal view. That was me in the audience. So we also had a big booth at the show, and so a couple of times we ran a different version of this, where we had 20 Ultrabooks, as you can see with the people on the bottom here, that we passed out to visitors so that they could see it from their own personal angle too. So I can give you an example of what this version looked like from the audience perspective. And this also gives you an idea of what the audience in the keynote actually saw. They saw an indirect view, of course. It wasn't a hologram, right? You know, these were from fixed cameras that were placed in the environment so that you were able to switch. But in order to see this, you actually had to look at the big screen in order to see the effect. So instead, but if you had the personal Ultrabook on here, as I can show you, you can see the vision of what, now you get to see the whale coming out from a much more personal perspective on here into the environment. So I'll clip, you'll see it coming around, and then pretty soon you'll see it flying overhead as an example of this. So again, we had 20 Ultrabooks in which people were able to see this, and you'll see the pass right here. You can rotate it, yeah. So that gives you an idea of what it looked like on that. Now we had a third demo that we showed in the booth, and this ran constantly. And this was over what we call the frame object. And this was a three-dimensional sculpture that was used to market Ultrabooks. And there were a bunch of other creatures from the world of Leviathan. We call them baby Huxleys that would fly around this. And then you could tap on one, and you could bring it up to you and interact with it. But rather than showing you the interaction, what I want to show you is the tracking. Because the frame object, of course, was a three-dimensional object. It wasn't a flat 2D marker, et cetera, or an image. And as you can see, we're walking about a quarter circle around this object. And it actually is tracking off of the frame, despite the fact that you've got people walking around this environment, despite the fact that you have lights out. And it was actually fairly robust. I was very pleasantly pleased by the end results on this thing. And we actually weren't sure what the results were going to be until the show actually occurred. Why? Well, look, let's step back. You know, what's new here? I mean, we've all seen AR creatures that exist in the environment, usually on top of a marker or an image and such. Well, I would say that, you know, just the production values and scope of this made it compelling on this. But in addition, consider the kinds of environments in which we had to try to make these demos work. I mean, look at the keynote, for example. We've got thousands of people in the audience. They're all dark. You've got a bunch of lights up in the dark ceiling, and then the only bright area is basically the big screens, and those change all the time, right? Or in the booth, or on the frame. These were areas that were built not to support augmented reality. We could do precious little to actually change any of this in order to try to make augmented reality work in this environment. These are not areas that you would normally you would select if you were to doing a demo. Despite that, we were able to get it to work. Within the keynotes demo, my team built an inertia-only tracker for the tablet that we worked. For the ones in the booth and also on the frame, Matteo built a custom tracker that was merged, it was a hybrid tracker combining inertial tracking along with 3D point cloud feature tracking. But even worse, these areas were ephemeral. They didn't exist, all right, until basically a day before the show was going to go on. So it's not as if this was an environment like this auditorium that existed for months or years, and we can keep coming here and measuring and preparing everything. No, we had very, very little time and very little that we could actually do to prepare on this. And definitely in the case of the keynote, it was stressful. You know, we had one shot to get this right. I mean, when you have your CEO up on the stage, you've got 100 other Intel executives in the audience and 2,500 other people, then he expects it to work at exactly that time. There was a bit of pressure. You can see in the lower right image, that's Adam wearing a sign. I don't know if you can read it. It says, "Do not disturb." He's in the control room in the back of for the keynote. And I'll share with you one technical tidbit, is that if you ever try to do something like this, don't rely upon Wi-Fi actually working well. When you've got thousands of people, each person with multiple Wi-Fi capable devices, things drop all the time. And so we had to develop other types of techniques in order to do synchronization without having robust Wi-Fi. So in Leviathan, we tried to inspire people about one particular approach for AR storytelling, and that is using content that you already know, told by professional storytellers that you're already familiar with, by reading the book, by seeing the movie, etc. And then it might be compelling to take that content that you already know and love and move that into our world, into our reality. But let me talk about three other possible hypotheses here. And the first is reinforcing. So in reinforcing, let's say we take real locations that are already powerful, that you don't, even if you didn't augment them, they would be something very compelling by themselves. And if you, in a tasteful manner, try to add augmentations, it might form a new type of experience. My favorite example of this is 110 Stories, where if you are near Manhattan, it will render an outline of where the Twin Towers should be. And you can capture a picture of this and also write a few words, your own personal story as to what this means to you. I was part of a team that worked on the Westwood Experience, which was a location-based story where you learned about a striking young woman who became a famous actress. And this experience ended where you actually met her, the real person, in her final resting place, in her crypt. And this was a surprise to most of the participants. They didn't expect to actually end in a cemetery. And they actually discovered her identity at that point. And most people reported that this was a powerful and poignant experience. Reskinning. So perhaps you're in reality and maybe there's nothing that special about where you're standing. Maybe you're at a street corner and you see some airplanes flying overhead and you see cars driving on the street and maybe there's people walking down the sides. Nothing really special about it. But now with reskinning, what you're trying to do is twist that, to change that, to meet the needs of the story that you want to tell. And the best concept of that I know is from Vernor Vinge's book, A Rainbow's End, where he hypothesizes basically perfect outdoor augmented reality in the not-too-distant future. And people create things what they call belief circles, which are shared themes of how to change reality to what they want. It could be, say, a medieval theme, or it could be, say, a Leviathan theme. So if it was a Leviathan theme, then instead of seeing the aircraft, you see flying whale airships. And if instead of seeing the cars, you see other types of fabricated living beasts that serve that role. And instead of seeing people in modern clothes, you'd see them in World War I uniforms. Obviously, to pull this off requires advancements in technology. We need to understand much more about the real world than just knowing a marker or an image in that environment. The Intel RealSense technology is a step toward this. The image in the center here is from the scavenger pod demo, which was showed at CES, which was able to scan an environment that it didn't previously have a model of, and now it's rendering it with this grid on top to turn it into a kind of a terrain for this little robot to fly around on. Finally, the third is remembering. So again, maybe there's nothing that special about reality in the particular spot where you are, but maybe what's special are the memories. And these could be memories that maybe are shared with many different people. For example, maybe you want to tell the story of how you celebrated the last time the San Francisco Giants won the World Series and where you were in San Francisco and reconstructing that for a person. Or it could be a very personal thing. The image on the right, that's where I got married. I mean, that really is. That's the gazebo where I got married. And I have photos and I have videos of this. But if I could retell this story, my own personal story of that, to maybe just my own family or to close friends on that. Stories don't have to just be aimed at a mass market, told by professional storytellers. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that are just, personal to us, to our own friends, and to our own family. So Leviathan was a large team effort. The person who leads that effort is inside Intel Labs is Tawny Shaleski, and she recruited me and also two of my team, Josh Ratcliffe and Jan Zhu, and the three of us did some of the technical work for the Leviathan demonstrations. Intel is also partnering with the USC School of Cinematic Arts, Professor Alec McDowell, who leads the World Building Media Lab there. And Mateo provided the tracking technology for two of the demonstrations, and Wondros was a production company that built much of the application and the content that you saw. So thank you for your time and attention. I hope I've given some food for thought. There are more events coming from Intel later at this show. If you want to learn more about RealSense technology, Gila Kamhi, who is from our perceptual computing group, will be talking about that. Also, Seth Hunter, who works with me in Intel Labs, will talk about his work in shared spaces. We have a booth here at the exhibit hall. Please check that out. And if you would like to learn more about support for building in RealSense, there's $1 million available, and go check it out, that link. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. We have time for a couple of questions while we are changing over for the next speaker. So I think we have a live mic. If anyone has a question from the floor. One over here.
I would like to know if you have some specific storytelling method, more narrative principle linked to augmented reality, because you're taking storytelling from external stories and then you applied some techniques to it. But can we have really, as a new media, augmented reality needs its own storytelling, or at least its own narrative principles?
I think those are to be developed. I don't think that the Buster Keatons or the Charlie Chaplins or those early directors, the equivalent within film, have actually come out yet. There are numerous examples of people trying to do, including me, ways of telling stories. But I don't think we've advanced enough yet to really have a theory of narrative, at least I don't have one to offer on that. I think that these are going to be done by people actually trying to tell stories, and we'll learn and we'll develop those theories.
Yes, the mic's coming.
So Ron, when you first started writing about AR, is this the kind of stuff you were thinking of?
I don't know if it was specifically in terms of storytelling, but I think I did have visions of how to change the way that people looked upon the world. And one of the most fundamental ways of doing that is with stories. I mean, to me, one of the ultimate potentials of augmented reality is if it can change your perspective so that you can, even changes the way that you have your belief system. One example that I give on that is a friend of mine had a stroke. He's now confined to a powered wheelchair. I'm now sensitive to things like where are the ramps or where are the elevators, which I never was sensitive to before. And if you can, through augmented reality, understand someone else's point of view, be it political or social or historical or cultural, that would be really powerful.
Thank you very much, Ronald. We have to move on because we're running short of time.